A woman I'd never met opened my mother's front door and told me the cleaning lady was around back if I needed something. The cleaning lady was my mother. And she was kneeling on the patio, scrubbing a grill that wasn't even hers to clean, in a $600,000 house I had paid for myself. This is her Untold Stories. Hit subscribe right now, because by 9 o'clock that same night, everything about this situation had changed, and it didn't take a single raised voice to do it. Welcome back. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. To understand how my mother ended up on her knees on her own patio, I need to take you back 5 years, to the year my father died and I made her a promise. My name is Simone. I'm 37, and for the last 5 years I've worked as a travel IQ nurse on overseas contracts, first in the Middle East, then a longer stretch in Singapore. It's demanding work, but it pays well, and the plan was always the same. Work hard while I was young and unattached, save aggressively, and use that money to take care of my mother once my father was gone. My father passed away 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack. He and my mother, Eleanor, had been married for 38 years, and losing him broke something in her that never fully healed. She sold the modest house they'd raised us in, and for a while she lived in a small rental apartment, quieter and smaller than anything she'd known as an adult. My younger brother, Derek, lived 20 minutes from her rental with his wife, Kayla, and their 2 kids. He visited when he could, which, if I'm being honest, wasn't often. Derek has always been well-meaning but easily overwhelmed, and Kayla has always been the more forceful personality in their marriage, the one who set the tone for how the family operated. 2 years ago, once my savings had grown enough, I did something I'd been planning since the year my father died. I bought my mother a house, a beautiful, single-story home, with a wide porch and a garden she'd always wanted, worth just over $600,000. I put the deed in my name, with my mother as a named life estate holder, meaning she had a permanent, legally protected right to live there for the rest of her life, regardless of anything else that happened with the property. I did this deliberately, and I want to explain why, because it matters enormously for what happened later. I'd seen enough, even from overseas, of how families can shift once money and property enter the picture. I wanted my mother protected, no matter what, protected even from me, honestly, in the sense that even if something ever happened to me, her right to that home couldn't be taken away by anyone, including my own brother. At the time, I only told my mother and my attorney about the specifics of that arrangement. Derek and Kayla knew I'd helped Mom get a house. They didn't know the deed was solely in my name, or that a recorded life estate agreement was what actually protected her ability to live there permanently. For the first year, everything seemed fine from the updates my mother gave me over our weekly video calls. Then, about 8 months ago, Derek and Kayla's rental lease ended unexpectedly, when their landlord decided to sell the property. My mother, generous as always, offered to let them stay with her just for a little while as they looked for a new place. I was thousands of miles away, working 12-hour IQ shifts, trusting that my mother's home, the home I had worked years to give her, was still exactly what I'd intended it to be. A place where she was safe, respected, and cared for. I had no idea how far that had already drifted from the truth. Looking back now, there were signs in our video calls that I brushed past too easily. My mother started looking tired in a way that wasn't just about age. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd started doing a bit more around the house now that the kids were there. She stopped showing me the garden the way she used to, proud and detailed, plant by plant. I told myself it was just the adjustment of having more people under one roof. What I didn't know was that within 2 months of moving in, Kayla had effectively reorganized the household around herself as though she, not my mother, were the one who owned the home. She moved my mother out of the primary bedroom, the one with the ensuite bathroom my mother had specifically chosen for its wide walk-in shower, and into the smaller guest room, explaining that Derek and Kayla needed the space more with 2 young kids. My mother, never one to make a fuss, agreed to keep the peace. From there, it escalated in small, almost invisible increments. A chore chart appeared on the refrigerator, with my mother's name listed for daily cooking, laundry for all 4 family members, and school morning pickups for her grandchildren, alongside general house cleaning. Kayla framed it, according to what I later learned, as everyone contributing. But the chart, conveniently, had far more items under my mother's name than under anyone else's. 5 weeks ago, I finally got a long enough break between contracts to fly home and surprise her. I hadn't seen my mother in person in over a year, and I wanted her first face-to-face look at me to be exactly that, a surprise, not a scheduled video call. I arrived at the house with my suitcase, rang the doorbell, and a woman I didn't recognize answered. It was a friend of Kayla's over for a visit. When I asked for my mother, she said, without any malice, simply repeating what she'd apparently been told, "Oh, the cleaning lady's probably out back. She was working on the grill earlier." I froze for a moment, genuinely confused, before I realized with a sinking sick feeling exactly who she meant. I walked around to the backyard and there was my mother, 66 years old. Kneeling on the concrete patio in gardening gloves, scrubbing grease off a grill that Derek had bought after moving in, sweat on her forehead in the afternoon heat. While inside the house, through the open kitchen window, I could hear Kayla laughing on the phone. My mother looked up, saw me, and her whole face changed, first joy, then, almost instantly, something like embarrassment. Like she'd been caught at something she didn't want me to see. That single expression told me more than any conversation could have. This wasn't a one-time chore, this was her new normal. I helped my mother up, and I told her, gently, that we needed to talk, just the two of us. We sat in the small guest room she'd been moved into, and for the first time in months, she told me the truth instead of the softened version she'd been giving me over video calls. She told me about the chore chart, about being moved out of her own primary bedroom, about Kayla's habit of introducing her to guests as Derek's mom. She helps out around here instead of simply as the homeowner she legally was. About the exhaustion of trying to keep the peace in a house that was supposed to be her sanctuary, not her job. She cried quietly and said something that has stayed with me since. "I didn't want to bother you overseas with something so small." It wasn't small. It had just been made to feel small, one polite accommodation at a time, until an entire household had rearranged itself around treating a widow like staff in her own protected home. I want to be honest about my state of mind in that moment. Part of me wanted to walk into that kitchen and say something I'd regret. But I'd spent 5 years in ICUs learning that the calmest person in a crisis is usually the one who actually helps the patient survive it. This was a crisis. I decided to treat it like one. I called my attorney, Priya Nathan, who had drawn up the original life estate agreement 2 years earlier. She confirmed exactly what I remembered. My mother held a legally recorded permanent right to occupy and control that home, superior to any informal arrangement Derek or Kayla believed they had. Priya also flagged something important nothing prevented me from formally clarifying. In writing, exactly who had authority over decisions in that household, including who could invite guests to stay and for how long. That afternoon, with my mother's full agreement, Priya drafted a short formal letter on official letterhead. It stated plainly that my mother, Eleanor, held sole life estate rights to the property, that any other occupants were residing there at her discretion and hers alone, and that continued residence going forward required her explicit, ongoing permission she was. As of that letter, choosing not to extend indefinitely. I printed 2 copies, and that evening, once Derek got home from work, I asked the whole household to sit down together in the living room. The room, notably, my mother had been quietly discouraged from using for anything but tidying. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances one by one, though I could have. I simply placed the letter on the coffee table and asked Kayla to read it out loud, because I wanted every word to be heard directly, in her own voice, rather than filtered through anyone's interpretation. She read it. I watched her face shift as she got to the phrase sole life estate rights, and again at residing there at her discretion. Derek, to his credit, looked genuinely stunned. I don't believe he'd ever fully understood the legal structure of the house, and I don't think it had occurred to him, until that moment, how thoroughly the household dynamics had drifted from anything resembling respect for his own mother. Kayla tried, briefly, to argue that they'd helped out plenty, and that this felt like being punished for pitching in. I told her calmly that gratitude and ownership were 2 different things, and that a chore chart with her mother-in-law's name on nearly every line wasn't help. It was a quiet transfer of labor onto the one person in the house with the least power to object. My mother spoke for herself at that point, and I want to give her that moment its full weight, because it was hers, not mine. She said, quietly but clearly, that she loved having her grandchildren nearby, but that she would not continue living as a housekeeper in her own home, and that she was asking Derek and Kayla to find their own place within 30 days. By 9 o'clock that same night, Derek and Kayla had agreed, tensely but without further argument, to begin looking for a rental the next morning. They moved out 3.5 weeks later, into a 2-bedroom apartment across town. The primary bedroom, with its walk-in shower, is my mother's again. The chore chart came down from the refrigerator the same night the letter was read. Derek visits now, on his own, usually on Sundays. And whether from guilt or genuine reflection, I honestly don't know, which he's started showing up with groceries instead of expecting a meal to already be waiting. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't the confrontation in the living room. It was the image of my mother on her knees on that patio, scrubbing a grill in gardening gloves, embarrassed for me to see what her own home had quietly become. That image is the reason I'll never again assume that love alone is enough to protect the people I care about. But I also learned something I now carry into everything I do for my family from overseas. Love isn't proof of ownership, and it was never meant to replace paperwork. Knowing whose name is on a deed, an account, or a life estate agreement isn't cynical, it's one of the clearest ways you can actually protect someone you love. Especially when you can't always be there in person to protect them yourself. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my mother's story and mine. If you've ever watched someone you love get quietly demoted in their own family, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and this community has meant a great deal to both of us through this. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to her Untold Stories. Thank you for watching.